as I've mentioned in other videos, I mean, this culture war has been going on for the latter half of the 20th century in earnest, but in the last decade or so, it's really become so huge and so all-encompassing that no one can escape the culture war now. Whereas, 15 years ago, gamers were trucking on. We were playing our video games, and the industry itself was largely insulated from these issues. And really, it was this Gamergate consumer revolution happening, where gamers were calling out nepotism and corruption within the games journalism sphere, thinking that they were entitled to have a voice, and of course, we learned that to resist this juggernaut that is the modern left in all of its Bolshevik just irresistibility, to stand up to that will get you flattened, right? Because again, we've since learned that culture can only be allowed to move in one direction. And I guess this was the start of the incel meme, this anti-male, anti-young white male culture of exclusion and persecution, and it really kicked off. I mean, the original incel was the gamer, the young straight white male gamer, because during this Gamergate period, the journalists were very, very angry that we, as a consumer base, had the gall to call them out and demand things like ethics and transparency. Now, we didn't know any better because, again, as millennial men, we'd been raised on this ideology of, well, protesting is good. We protested the invasion of Iraq and George Bush by buying Green Day albums or whatever, so I'm going to protest this. But we soon discovered that anyone speaking out in favor of Gamergate was immediately bombarded with accusations of sexism, bigotry, racism. And it didn't take long until the entire point of the Gamergate movement had been smeared so heavily within the mainstream that, to this day, people still think, oh yeah, what was that about? Oh yeah, gamers hate women and gamers are misogynists. From seemingly out of nowhere, too, this captured press declaring in lockstep that the legacy consumer base of this entire industry is not wanted anymore. Gamers are dead. That was the literal headline ran by Leigh Alexander, and variations on that sentiment were published everywhere, from Eurogamer to IGN to The Guardian's tech column. They were encouraging developers to come out in support of the anti-Gamergaters who were standing up for women, because all these vulnerable women have been victimized by gamers for so long, and it's time to speak out about it. So suddenly, there's this huge amount of pressure being put onto devs in the industry, and really anybody on the fence that really just wanted to stay out of the issue and maintain their neutrality, to come out in support of the anti-Gamergaters and also agree that yes, this industry is toxic, gamers are scum, and there has to be something done about it ASAP. So, by the way, ignore that leaked email list that shows devs and journos collaborating in a conspiratorial environment to try and push certain narratives. Ignore it. Don't trust your lying eyes. I guess that was the consensus, and you had some devs standing up, like Notch, for instance. He came out and he was like, yeah, fuck the anti-Gamergaters. The dev behind The Vanishing of Ethan Carter, an indie dev, he wrote a big blog in favor of Gamergate. And, in the mainstream press, we didn't really have very many allies, but, the infamous Milo Yiannopoulos, he got his start covering Gamergate for Breitbart. But you have to remember, this was my, and also many other gamers, first encounter with Marxist-style journalistic assassination tactics, where they're really trying to destroy you. I mean, most of the devs that spoke out in favor of Gamergate, their reputations were permanently tainted. I mean, even to this day, the agitation has never really ended. And it was so bizarre to see these journalists really showing their true colors and going for the kill. And the point is, well, these are Bolshevik-style activists. They destroy their enemy, Alinsky style. I mean, if you've ever read Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky, the Jewish guru of the modern Democratic Party. I mean, this guy's a hardcore Marxist, and his hyper-aggressive style of playing politics, I mean, we were getting a taste of that during Gamergate, and it was relentless. And it silenced so many developers and enthusiast journalists, and really laid the groundwork for the wokeification of gaming as it exists today, and also this culture of anti-masculinity really kicking into high gear because, as you'll remember, feminism was a big part of Gamergate. That was the tip of the spear. the weapon of critical theory used to destroy the true culture of gaming and invalidate the identity of the average gamer, the young, disenfranchised white male seeking camaraderie, seeking community, and finding it within this pastime of video games. Because there's something about video games that's not only appealing to young men, there's a primal aspect to it too. And I think the biggest tragedy post-Gamergate was the normalization of this anti-masculinity as something culturally accepted, that young men are now incels. We're referred to by this dehumanizing label, regardless of whether or not you've had sex with a woman. It's not even about that at all. I mean, really, you can dissect this word, incel, and it reveals quite a lot about the person using it. I mean, they are trying to say that as a man, to simply be validated through sex by a woman is like the highest accolade one can receive, and almost like a stamp of approval from the gynocentric society. And it's women who are reducing male-female relationships to this spiritual homosexuality, like this gay lifestyle where you're running through body after body after body in this meaningless cycle of nihilistic pleasure-seeking. It's amazing to me that modern normies, both male and female, have to cope and exist within this toxic system that they're almost unable to even perceive. Like gormless, over-socialized koi, they swim about amidst this social and spiritual decay. Gloop, gloop, the new male sputters. I slayed some pussy recently, and yet I still feel hollow. I expected to be elevated above even a man like Nikola Tesla. And women, whose natural inclination to be these genetic selectors to choose the highest value men, well, that instinct has been hijacked by wokeism in the postmodern state. Women have been turned into selectors for dysgenics. What kind of slur or insult even is this? It only makes sense if you're some kind of gyno-narcissist, serial pedestalizer of women who, you have no integrity anyway if that's your position, right? I mean, this word is simply, another linguistic weapon which these people use to control narratives, to control society, and to undermine any culture and any identity that they don't jive with. Pure social terrorism, really. Stochastic terrorism meant to neuter the political will of an entire generation, in fact, multiple generations of young men. And the craziest thing is, what excuse does a country have to persecute its own youth? It doesn't make any sense unless you look at the issue through this woke lens where, any kind of destruction, persecution, torture, it's all justified as a stepping stone on the road to utopia where, as a disciple of this ideology, I have moral carte blanche, total freedom to engage in the darkest aspects of humanity in the name of equity. And it's evil because nature is not equitable. You can't force equity. To do so is to have the ego of Satan himself, to have such a disregard for natural law that there's nothing you wouldn't be willing to do or sacrifice in pursuit of this power, this power that really only God should possess, right? So that's how religious a lot of these quote-unquote atheist thinkers and woke apologists actually are. Religious in their devotion to Luciferianism, the inversion of everything traditional, everything good. Order itself, a devotion to pure chaos. Well, chaos is a very feminine trait in the Jungian sense. And the more masculine a culture and a society is, the more it resists chaos. And it's my theory that the masculine spirit and the way that gaming connects with it and affirms it, that is the reason why the mainstream hates the traditional gamer identity so much, in the same way that they hate white identity and they hate heteronormativity. Cis is like this neo-slur trotted out at every opportunity by trans activists and allies, leftists of all shapes and sizes, and they hate us because of what we represent, and they hate what gaming really is. Not neo-gaming, where you're forced to play as like a deformed, obese black lesbian, and all forms of competition and of actual challenge have been sucked away in the name of inclusivity, diversity, etc. It's another method of enforcing this equity, which is of course highly destructive when the entire pastime itself is based on a foundation of healthy competition. They hate what gaming used to be so much because it was revealing truths about ourselves. You know, we were learning things about ourselves through this medium of gaming and this meditative, high IQ pastime, far more worthwhile than any gay Hollywood movie could ever hope to be. And I believe that's what made Gamergate such a battleground, because we were not willing to concede this ground without a fight. You know, we weren't willing to have our culture and our community destroyed without fighting back, because it's like that classic copy pasta. Oh, you messed with a gamer. Well, we've been training to fight authoritarianism and tyranny, you know, since we were children, and we don't give up that easily, right? And it's a little cringe, but ultimately I agree with that message, you know, because gaming speaks to the core fundamentals of what it means to be a man. Men love games. You know, there's that quote from Blood Meridian, the harrowing Western book by Cormac McCarthy. You know, there's the judge. He explains that men are born for games because this world, you know, the competition inherent in survival is a characteristic that permeates the male psyche. And, you know, boys play games, but the ultimate game is war. Two men on a theater stage in this dance of brutality, and, you know, one standing in the light and the other descending into the darkness. At the core of every worthwhile video game, there is this philosophy of conflict and of war, either being at war with the game itself and its systems and its difficulty and to overcome, or to be at war with another gamer and to prove your skill and your superiority. To be a man in this world is to go to war, and, you know, you fight your own personal war. It doesn't always have to be literal, right? And yet we fight these wars as individuals every single day. And Gamergate was one of the last times we as a society saw that spirit of masculinity just rising up for one last hurrah, one last gasp. I am a gamer and I exist. That was our battle cry as we were torn apart by the artillery of the Marxoid, Tranoid journalists. It reminds me of the ending of Red Dead Redemption, actually. Spoiler alert, but, you know, and I also fuck the sequel, right? I mean, you know, the idea of the wholesome Chungus cowboy that is Arthur Morgan and his opining on the transition of the Wild West to modernity. And anyone dumb enough want to vote, I say, you go for it. I'm behind feminism. Wait, feminism doesn't even exist yet. Well, you know what? I'm going to found it then. In 1890, Arthur Morgan, the original feminist. Isn't this great? Aren't you enjoying playing as me, gamers? I'm a wholesome Chungus, you know? I can't stand that. I prefer the original ending of RDR1, where John Marston, you know, a man at the end of his time, instead of integrating, instead of rolling over like a good dog, in one last act of defiance, he allows himself to be gunned down by the forces of the government, by the agents of this encroaching modernity that simply will not allow a relic of this problematic historical period to continue existing, right? So that's how I want to go out.